Hello and welcome to the Excel VBA functions series. So in this video we will look at VBA date functions. And the first thing we need to know is how to declare a date variable. So let's go to the Visual Basic Editor and have, for example, the date variable. And we declare a date variable as my date as a date, simply like that. Then we can get a date from the worksheet. For example, let's say we want to get this date, assuming this is formatted already as a date, but we will see later how to do that if it's not. And then we can have my date equals, in this case is the active cell dot value, which is a date. We could of course also specify the exact, this is B3. Right, so we already have a date here, but there are other ways to create a date. And for that, we use the date value function. We will see that in a moment. But now, things that we can do with a date. So the same thing we can do in Excel using the formulas, year, month, day, weekday, and week number. So in our macro, we could get the year with year, my date. The same for my month. We also have the month name as in the worksheet function. So my month name, and here we give my month. So it's giving the month's name. And then as you can imagine, we have also my day. And we also have my week, which is given a number from 0 to 6 for each of the weekdays. But we do not have an exact same VBA function for week number, for example, the week within the year. But for that, we have another very useful VBA function, which is date part. Date part gets a part of a date. And there are, for example, we could get the quarter of the year. So that would be my, let's call it my quarter. And that would be with date part. We need to specify here as a string the interval, as you see in the function. And there are a number of possibilities. Q is for quarter. Then we will have here my date. So this will return, if we put it in a message box, the quarter for this date. And it's the fourth quarter of the year, it's November. And we can use many other. For example, we could have the day of the year from 1 to 365. The week number, which we didn't, we got the weekday here, but the week number would be an equivalent to this worksheet function, week number, right? So the possibilities, let me put them down here for you. So these are basically the possibilities for date part. Now we've got the date from the worksheet. If we want to have the date given here, we're gonna get into that in a moment, but we could of course write here any date, or we can get today's date also in the same way we do in Excel, but the function is a bit different. Here is simply date, as in many other programming languages, right? While in Excel, in the Excel worksheet, you would use rather today. Or you would use now if you want to have the date and time as well. Well, now it's formatted as a date, but if you format it as a time, you would get the time with this function. Uh, but we will talk about time later. So for now, this is today here, but this is date in VBA. So this is the VBA functions to get today's date. So this could be rather be today, and we would call it today. There's no problem here in VBA to use this as a variable name because there's no function as such. And of course, we could declare this today is also as a date. Now let's have a look at some other functions. Let me insert another module. I will call it date creation. We've seen already how to get the date from the worksheet. We've seen how to get the today's date. Now, if we want to build a date in our macro, we have several options. We can, of course, again, we can declare it as a date. And we can, of course, as we just said, have this and this would be the US format. So let's say mm, 1st of January 2025. And we can also use the hash for a date in VBA. So whatever is best for you. I prefer I prefer this other way. Now we can also use gate value. So my date value when we are getting the date from some other place and we are not sure which is the format, but we want to have it as a date in the macro. And as an example, let me go to, I will say active cell.value, and let me show you an example here in another sheet. And for example, we get this date, right, with the week name and the month and so on, and we want to convert it, and we want to make sure we have it as a date as it's shown here in our macro. So we would use date value to get that. That's the date value. And we would do the same if we have a date. Let's see now. Let's call it my date value. Let's say we have the date in some other format like that. Well, that would not really be recognized. And by the way, to see if this is a date, we can use the isDate function. So we can now display isDate, my date value, and this will tell us, let me comment this for now. This will tell us if this is a valid date. False is not, right? However, if we separate it with a space, now it is a valid date, true. Or if it is separated by a comma. So depending on the format, we can convert this to a real date function with this VBA function, right? This is also possible. And by the way, this will actually depend on your regional settings. So it may work for me because of my regional settings, but it may not work for you. But you can always use isDate. It's very useful to see if whatever you get is really a date. Now, if we know it's a date, because if it's not a date, this next function will prompt an error. But if we know it's a date, now we can build our date using this format here. So, but let's replace this. This is the value we're getting from whatever data, and this could be from a database, from another spreadsheet that a colleague sent you, and it has this a different format and so on. And then you could true this is a date, and then you could get you could get the standard date function as per your original settings as well, um, with the date value function. And this would also work with some other formats like this one. So let's say my date here, date value, and it will work with a format like that, Jan, because it is recognized either in the full way, January, or in the short version. So this would also give you a proper date from that. So 14th of January 2023 in this case. Now there is another way to build a date, and that's with date serial. So let's say you get the different parts of the date separately, like in separate numerical variables, my year, my month, let's say December, my day, 25th, 25, and you want to create a date from this. Well, you can just do something like this, my day, if you want first the day, as in Europe date format, and then you would add a slash, for example. The slash, as we've seen earlier, the slash is always recognized. Sometimes there are also some other, and depending on your original settings, there are other symbols that are recognized. You would use then my month and my year, and this would work so far. But there's a better way to do it in Excel VBA. So you have the date serial function. You could say, instead of what we did here, you could just say my date equals date serial for the year. You see, my year, my month, my day. And this will create, we can now comment this one, or it doesn't matter, but this would create the date from this data. There you go. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of other functions. I will put that in another module. So let me call it date calculations, maybe. And this is about manipulating a little the date. With these functions, we can, for example, add to a date. For example, add days to a date and get another date, or get the difference between dates. So if we want to get the difference, let's say we have, let me show you here in this other sheet. Let's say we have a start date and an end or finish date, and we want to get the difference. Well, in Excel, we could simply do the difference like that. So if we have B3, let me put that into the macro. Now we want to do it in our macro. Start date equals range B3, end date C3. Now we want to get the difference, as simple as that. 33 days, the same as here, that's the difference. Now, there are some functions to do it in a slightly better way, so to speak, and of course we can declare this as date, these variables as date, but the proper function to do this is rather using date diff. Date diff with two F's gives you the difference between two dates. And as you see, it's asking here for the interval. The interval, in this case, we want to see how many days. And then the first date, which is start date, and the last date, end date. Right? So this would give us the, the difference in days. Again, it's the same number, 33. Now, the advantage of this formula is that we can also get the, the difference in weeks or in months. And this follows the same um, classification that I show you here. So that's how we use date difference. Now there's another interesting thing to do when you have an end date, a start date, and end date, is to get the network days. And well, we can do that in VBA as well, of course, but there's a very handy Excel formula or Excel function to do that, which is network days. So network days will give you the working days difference. So between this and this, there are 22, and it allows also to include holidays. So as you see here, I have added a calendar or a small calendar for the last quarter of the year, and it's taking into consideration these holidays and it's deducting from the difference. So you see, this is a very useful formula for some uh, cases, and we do not have a straightforward VBA formula for that. We should use instead the worksheet formula in the macro, if we want to do it in the macro, of course. So instead of diff, let me call it net difference, and then we would use here the worksheet function network days. You see it's here, and it has the same arguments that we have here, of course. B1 is a start date, um, the start date, the end date, the start date, end date. And now if we want to add the holidays, we will have to put that into an array, into a variable, or into an array. We could get it from the range in the worksheet. In this case, if we say the range where we have the holidays, it is B6 to B9, right? And then we could I missed one parenthesis, and then we could get this network days difference um, in our macro as we did in the Excel worksheet. Now, finally, and there are probably a few more date functions, but the last one I want to show you today is date add. And date add is, for example, let's say my future date is gonna be date add, and this is my VBA function. And here again is the interval parameter here as a string, which is again, it can be days, months, it can also be hours or seconds. We will see that later in the next video. But let's say we want to add days to how many days we want to add. Let's say we want to add 10 days to my date, right? And my date, I didn't declare it yet, but let's say my date is today. And my future day in 10 days will be, if we put that in a message box and we comment this one, we don't want to show this one now. In 10 days from today will be the 26th of December. Is so today is the 16th of December. In 10 days it will be the 26th. And we could get the date in 10 months if we just change that, right? That would be October 2025, and so on. So these are probably the most useful VBA date functions. In the next video, we will look at time functions. So I hope this was useful, and thanks for watching.